Hi, thank you for joining me for a quick look at Henri Vieuxtemps's work for solo viola, Capriccio. Henri Vieuxtemps was a Belgian composer who lived from 1820 to 1881 and lived primarily in Paris and later in his life in Algeria. Vieuxtemps was a famous violin virtuoso as a young man and traveled all over Europe playing his own concertos. Later in life, he suffered some health issues and was not concertizing quite as much, but focused more of his energies on composition and wrote many of his best works in this later period of his life, including all of his works for viola, so lucky us. This piece, Capriccio, was originally written as one of a set of 6 works for solo violin, and he transcribed this one for viola. The title seems a bit of a misnomer to me. It's a little confusing. One would think that a work that has a title of Capriccio would be a capricious work, full of mischief and lightheartedness. However, this piece is neither of those things. I would think of it more as an elegy. A couple things that I like to think about when I'm working on this piece. The first one concerns the main melody, which occurs at the beginning. He writes this melody that has these arpeggiated chords that surround the melody at various points and point out different harmonic signposts. And one of the things that's tricky with this melody is being able to negotiate playing a really beautiful melody and fitting these chords in. And I find that it's very helpful for me if I start by working on just playing the melody without the chords, so that I really have a sense of my pacing and I have a sense of how I would phrase the melody. And so forth. And so I would try to play that a couple of times, the melody, and then add in the chords. And these are lightly arpeggiated chords, and try to make sure that the chords fit around the melody and not the other way around. Another thing that I like to consider with this piece is the structure of the melody that happens throughout. Vieuxtemps has this beautiful opening melody, and he repeats it 2 more times. The first 2 times that he has this melody that's in minor, it's immediately followed by a counter melody that's in major. However, the 3rd time that he introduces the theme, he does not have the counter melody, and he goes off into this very virtuosic, almost cadenza-like passage, which then winds down and ends the piece. I like to make sure that each one of these themes has a very different feel to it, to make sure that it's very clear to the listener how it develops over the course of the piece. So for the first time that occurs, I like to keep a very soft dynamic and a rather silvery sound, and keep things quite light in the bow. The second time that the theme comes, it's very similar to the first time, except we have forte. So I like to play it in a similar style as the first time, where I roll the chords, and it has this very melodic feel to it, but with a more robust sound, a little bit more energy in the feel, and maybe a little bit more direction in terms of the phrase. One other thing he introduces this time is that very quickly into it, he has a D major chord that comes as a bit of a surprise. So you can bring that out a little bit. The third time that the theme comes, he marks it con fuoco, which means with fire. And this time, I like to really have a contrast from the second time. Instead of arpeggiating the chords, I break them 2 and 2 for maximum intensity of effect. I like to have the loudest dynamic that I possibly can, and as much intensity in the vibrato as I can muster. And in that way, we can have the theme that occurs 3 different times and develops over the course of the piece, and each one has its own identity. One last thought that I have for this piece occurs at the very end. After we've gone through all of this very virtuosic and cadenza-like passage work, after this third theme, he winds the piece down, and at the very end, he has these 2 pizzicato chords. And these can be quite difficult to pull off. He's coming into a very soft dynamic. One thing that I find helpful is to try to slow down the rolling of the chords, and the last chord I actually play with my thumb so that I have as much control, and I play each note by itself, which is quite slow. But I have a lot of control over the pacing of the chords and the dynamics so that at the very end, these 2 chords help the piece evaporate into the air. I hope that you've enjoyed this exploration of Henri Vieuxtemps and his Capriccio for solo viola, and thank you so much for listening.